Esther.
And I'm Sean.
I write about AI news here at Tech Target in Massachusetts.
And I edit Esther's stories.
We're here to talk with tech experts about everything AI and ChatGPT.
Don't forget Google Gemini.
Whether it's who's ahead in the generative AI race, the metaverse, digital twins, or even the latest in autonomous vehicles, we've got it covered. Right, Sean?
Yep, we've got it covered. Hi, welcome all to the 1-year anniversary episode of our Targeting AI podcast from Tech Target.
1 year.
Woohoo! It's our Targeting 1-year anniversary, our Targeting AI podcast from Tech Target Editorial News. Our podcast has been downloaded about 5,100 times over the past year. I'm here with my co-host, Esther Zhao, our AI news writer. This is the 28th episode of Who's Counting, since we kicked off the series with our first guest, Michael Bennett, a deep thinker about AI and legal issues, and his title is AI Policy Advisor at Northeastern University. He was a great first guest. Esther, what do we look to accomplish when we booked Michael to be the first guest on our new podcast?
Yeah, congratulations on 1 year, Sean. But yeah, we were looking to accomplish, I think we were thinking more about the AI regulation. Generative AI was just getting popular. Even though the technology has been around for quite a while, we were seeing ChatGPT and all of that. And all the GPTs, I think, came out around that time. If you can remember, our inbox was flooded with all the GPTs. And we're thinking more about the regulatory landscape in some way. I would say a lot has changed since then, but also not much has changed. We still have the question around the regulation of generative AI. The regulation is slow and it tends to follow technology. At the same time, we've accomplished some things when it comes to regulation. We have the New York hiring law and the EU AI Act. We have the CCPA. We also have the executive order on AI that came out last October. So let's look a little bit at Michael's episode and just play a snippet just to see what he had to talk about during that time.
The conversation within legal circles, both in terms of practitioners and academics, when it comes to generative AI, and specifically, large language models, ChatGPT 3 and 4, the conversation is pretty intense for a few crucial reasons. So, starting with the academy, educators and learners, right, the professors and the students are, first of all, just trying to come to grips with, how best to make one's way through a legal education given this new technology. So, I have a small army of research assistants now, most of them law students, and I fold ChatGPT right into our work. So, a concrete example, we are, and this won't surprise you at all, looking very closely at the European Union's AI law, which will very likely come online, become enforceable before this year is out. And we have a host of research questions, things we're trying to understand about this law. And we're making some speculations as well about where the regulatory landscape will be, say, by the time we get to the end of 2024. And right now, I think of ChatGPT 3 as, on some days, like another research assistant. So if I have a question, I'm looking into it. I've got the human RAs looking into it. We will get together, and sometimes we'll just pull GPT right in and say, here's the question. This is what we're thinking. Does this make sense? Is there another way? Did we miss something? Right. So using it in that kind
That's
of
cool.
it's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting stuff.
So right there, he was talking about GPT 3, I think, which is like, what number are we on right now, Sean?
We are now on 4.5.
Yeah.
Right.
So like, that's pretty crazy. We've
It
been
is.
thinking
Well, you're talking about
so
3,
much.
4.5. So what's coming out next?
Probably 5. Is it 5?
Yeah, you wrote about 4 Mini the other day. I believe Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has said that GPT-4 even is like nothing. It's like horrible compared to what GPT-5 is going to be. So it just shows how fast all this stuff is progressing since we talked to Michael Bennett 1 year ago.
Yeah. And Michael Bennett also in that episode, he was also talking about like some of the controversies, right? In terms of the art world, and all of that. So let's play a clip from that.
Sounds good.
And so there've been, a whole range of controversies. Some of them have gone over into, official legal controversies, right? Such as there's the cases now out there in which, photographers, or better yet, more precisely, organizations who,
Getty Images?
right, exactly, who have licenses to use and to sell photographers' works are pushing back against generative AI platforms that have used those databases to train their AIs.
Yeah, so we remember, I think there's still that controversy in terms of data and the training of data, but at that time it was with Getty Images, like you mentioned in the episode, Sean. And Getty Images has come out since that to create its own like AI tool working with NVIDIA. So there's such a huge like change in terms of we can still, I feel like there's still that same problem of data, which we'll continue to talk about throughout this episode, but also the problem of like how do we fix that? Who owns the data? Um, the photographers was that at that time. Then there
Yeah,
was the
and
writers, right?
yeah, so vendors like Adobe have also gotten into that with just using their own licensed images as fodder for their generative AI tools.
So one of about the top 10 most downloaded episode over the past year was Michael Stewart, who was the chief AI partner at Microsoft venture capital firm M12. It was our most downloaded episode over the past 12 months. I think that was because of the fact that Microsoft is a huge AI investor, obviously, but you also have like OpenAI. Microsoft is the biggest backer of OpenAI. They've invested like 13 billion or so into them. They're a key player in the Gen AI race. You know, we had the whole Gen AI war back and forth all of last year and still now. But I also think part of the reason Michael was so popular, that's Michael Stewart from Microsoft venture capital firm, that is because of how candid he was about the type of startups that M12 invest in. Why do you think it was popular, Sean?
Michael Stewart's really no nonsense. His business is just like profit and loss and probability of success. So in my opinion, in addition to Microsoft's prominence as a vendor whose chief mission is serving enterprises, obviously maybe the biggest software vendor in the world, people are super interested in what are the hottest AI startups, and this is what Michael Stewart is looking at, and which ones get the money, which is what it's all about in enterprise software for the vendors. Also, he was, articulate, smart person who came on and wasn't afraid to, submit to a list of candid questions. And he didn't really know everything exactly we were going to talk about. So he came on and who knows, maybe he shared it. Maybe hit the startups he's invested in, shared it, but got a lot of listeners and we're grateful for that. So now we're going to play a clip of Michael.
This is less of a, I think, less of a worry that Microsoft will be like left behind in this unfolding story, as much as making sure they are aware of the most attractive, most competitive, newest technologies that they could partner with. And to Esther's point, what this new era has definitely revealed is if you're creating a new technology that has this very large impact on the deployment of AI, there are going to be many more opportunities to work with the big tech companies via investment or just partnering itself than existed in the past, because there's more experience in just how to plug those into an overall emerging story. And the agility of the big tech companies is very different. You can't really describe how they're behaving today in the same terms as a couple of years ago. Everyone is like shipping products like crazy, ready to break things apart, substitute in new things. So this is a very ripe environment for startups that have a partnership mindset to work with the majors, I think.
So I found that interesting because I think at the same time when we talked to Michael, I was working on a story about like this partnership that I was seeing. I didn't see a lot of what was it, acquisition at the time, especially in the early stage of generative AI. We were seeing a partnership between OpenAI and Microsoft, AWS and Anthropic. Google and Core a little bit. And so there wasn't a lot of let's acquire these foundation model providers and use their technology. Instead, it's like let's partner with them and also partner with other people at the same time, right?
Yeah, even Oracle invested in Cohere, so they outsourced, and I thought that was one of your best stories of the year, Esther. To our listeners, our podcast, Targeting AI, is our podcast, but the main work we do is written reports of what's going on in the AI industry, which Esther is our AI writer. I try to fill in a little bit when she's out. So that was a great story. It showed that for the first time, really, in recent software history, you had these big vendors kind of partnering instead of doing it in house. They're kind of patrons. In fact, Esther, that model is now being scrutinized by the federal regulatory authorities, right, for alleged restraint of trade, antitrust.
Yeah, I was gonna just say that recently, obviously, OpenAI and Microsoft are being looked very intensely by the European Union, and also like that's part of the reason why I think Meta it was said that it was not no longer going to have its multimodal capabilities in Europe. A lot of these tech companies are like wising up to the fact that a lot of the moves that they're making is being looked at very intensely.
Yeah, and even Google and Anthropic, or whoever invested in Anthropic. So everybody's kind of being looked at by European and American regulators. So Esther, let's move along. I'm going to ask you, what's another particularly interesting episode that you saw, or maybe one that you really liked that was also one of the top 10. So this is one that you liked and one that the listeners liked also.
I don't know if I picked the one that is one of the top 10. The episode that I really like is the one with Julia Powell, the NYU professors who came to talk about their books. I think is the Seven Principles of Responsible AI or something like that. They discussed the idea of data ownership, right? And what I loved about it was because when we talk about generative AI, when we talk about enterprises, the main issue is around data and how data is traded. I think one of the main issues with ChatGPT and why a lot of enterprises told their employees not to use it is because they're like, is our proprietary data being trained on with ChatGPT? And then last year, one of the stories that I wrote about was about the Lensa app, and that's when people were creating AI images of themselves, and so it's like, is my proprietary data of my face is that being traded on? And so we had that discussion on that episode of how do we responsibly trade data. That was more of a consumer story, but I thought that what Juliet particularly had to say was very interesting. So let's just play a little bit from this episode quickly.
I think that the moment that you start understanding the value of your data, you start to realize the power that it has and the power that we're essentially, for the most part, giving up. So I wrote this whole project. Essentially, this book is based on my dissertation at Columbia. Before writing the dissertation, I was doing research and specifically on data exchanges. So there are many Scandinavian countries, for example, that are doing data exchanges where, for example, in Finland, I was working with the largest private company in Finland, and they're an old co-op, an old farmers co-op that was built, two centuries ago. And they started out with this principle that everyone in the community is part owner of the organization. Well, the organization is so big that it's the equivalent of a Costco meets a Walmart, meets all the hotel chains that you can ever imagine. They own cars and gas and banks and just they really have a monopoly in the space. And because they've been around for 200 years and everybody's ancestors, including their parents and children, all shop in the same ecosystem, every time they buy something, right, they get paid, and they get paid directly in their bank. There's no discount coupon or anything like that. As soon as the company makes money, right, individuals actually see the money coming into their bank account. So it's much less of a micro transaction than, imagine your whole world was utilizing your data, which it likely is, and you got paid for all of it at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the quarter, whatever it might be. So that there's a direct relationship in seeing how things are moving within the economy, how they're working within the organization, but also how you're an integral part of that, and how these money flows are also potentially yours, as is in the case of Scandinavia. Now, obviously, that is quite a unique example. And what's really interesting is during the pandemic, we also saw those data exchanges happening with neighboring countries like Estonia, for example. But there are many, many differences, obviously, between those countries and the United States.
So yeah, that episode, she was talking about basically another system where people will basically pay for their data, and I thought that was very fascinating.
I did too, and I had actually forgotten about that part of that podcast. And listening to Juliet talk, she was just fascinating. And yeah, it would be nice. I mean, there have been discussions about micropayments here in the U.S. with for not AI but just giving Google your data or Meta or whatever. And so who knows? Maybe that's in our future. So meanwhile, I'm going to nominate one of my favorite episodes, though this was not in our official top 10 most listened to. It was well listened to, but not top 10. So this was, I'm going to say it was a pretty hard hitting interview with Wendy Gonzalez, the CEO of this data labeling and annotation vendor called Sama. This company, which is still in business, and it's also B Corp, which is a company that is dedicated to doing social good, as chartered as such, still for profit. But the company had been accused of paying substandard wages to workers in Africa, below the prevailing wage in Africa, and subjecting them to inhumane work environments by labeling these often violent and terrifying images for large language models. So I thought Gonzalez handled our questions pretty even-handedly, and she maintained her composure. She's a tough CEO. She defended the company's pay practices and, of course, blamed all the awful stuff on OpenAI. He said, "Oh, they made us do it," and this kind of stuff. So let's give a listen.
Our social mission is predicated on being able to get access to the digital economy. So this is the largest set of sort of jobs and investment, right? I'm sure you've seen and read, I'm sure you're probably even in better research than me in terms of understanding the GDP and the value that is going to be created from AI. Do we think only one group of people should benefit from that? Is that the belief that there shouldn't be participation in the digital economy? This is where all the jobs are going to be created, right? A huge portion of jobs are going to be created. And one of the reasons we focused on impact sourcing is because if all the jobs were available locally, if there was a huge amount of jobs available, well then that would be fine, right? Great. People would be able to work in a working economy. But part of the challenge is, and if you take a look at the OECD data, 86% of employment in sub-Saharan Africa is from the informal economy. So the informal economy means everything from, selling secondhand clothes to, doing construction. There aren't benefits. You have to show up to work. If you're sick, you don't earn money. And those the ability to create jobs and bring in jobs from other parts of the world is part of the global economy. Sure, you can say, well, why anybody participate in the digital economy? Well, it's for job creation. The whole reason why we launched this approach was not around sort of giving aid. It was about giving work. It's about creating financial independence in an ecosystem. So our 97% of our workforce exists within Kenya. We've created well over 10,000 jobs. Tens of millions of dollars of salaries and income and benefits that have affected family members and communities, creating an ecosystem where there are digital skills, job creation. That's significant. If there were plentiful jobs, meaning you sort of take it or leave it, then that would be amazing. Like that would be absolutely amazing. But that's not the situation. And being able to have people from around the world globally, in particular the ones that have the greatest barriers to employment, have access to the digital economy is important. I mean, unless the thought is that those jobs should be preserved for a certain group. I don't think so. I think that the world needs to participate, and the people across the world need to be able to access jobs in the digital economy.
Yeah, she was very tough. I mean, we were tough too, but I felt like she was like tough. In that clip, particularly, I loved it because she was like, "Well, are you saying that not everyone should have access to this technology?" Which I thought was a very good rebuttal and good response to our question.
I thought it was, but I think it would have killed them to pay, standard wages, higher wages back in Kenya. As a business, Sama still would have been successful. Like pay this prevailing wage, right? Just my opinion, by the way, folks, does not reflect TechTarget as a whole. All right, so anyway, I was going to say that, by the way, OpenAI, a little segue, has not yet agreed to be on our podcast. Notice I said yet. We're going to keep trying. We're going to keep trying to get somebody from OpenAI on the pod. That's a goal of mine for the year. But incidentally, we've had some pretty big names in terms of companies and vendors that have sent guests to be on the podcast. The companies include AWS, Salesforce, Walmart, Wayfair, and Lenovo. So Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, NVIDIA. What are you waiting for? Come on the podcast, and we'll have a really good dialogue. It'll be good for you. It'll be good for us.
Yeah, I mean, what are you waiting for? But while we are waiting for them, don't forget that we had some really good startups, including those that have been successful. For example, NVIDIA's competitor, Nova, they're entering an open source hardware and software vendor that has the courage to compete against NVIDIA. So their CEO came on, and then we had the CEO of music licensing from Audio Socket, Jen Anderson Miller, to talk about musicians' right in the age of generative AI. Again, talking about that data and some of the controversies. So let's start with Sam Nova's clip, and then we'll go to play Jen Anderson Miller's clip.
The way that data is being regulated today, so if you're in highly regulated environments, right, people want to make sure that you have all the policies around protecting clients' data, right? All the all the right policies to make sure that it doesn't leak, that it's used properly. If you're in Europe with GDPR, there's the customer rights around my data and where it's used. The way that I think the world is going is the models will be an extension of the data, right? Because it is a representation. The data is ultimately what allows you to represent the model to do a set of things, right? And so a lot of businesses are now starting to realize, okay, well, I want to use AI and I want to actually use it in, get the capabilities of it. But as the corporation increases, the nuances of what you can share and what you can't share through, a 50,000 person company, it's actually hard to educate a 50,000 person company on exactly what's okay to put out there, what's not okay to put out there. Did you know that uploading to a public model, the data it remains in the model forever? Like, it's like, do you know that? Or even the questions you ask is also registered as something that you're interested in to the public forever, right? And so I think to educate people on the fact that it's what your interaction to the models are now public knowledge. That's something that not everybody in the world understands, and certainly not anything that people in companies understand. And so this is where we come in and say, look, the best way to do this as you're trying to educate a workforce on how AI models work is do it all in private, right? To do it on private, because if it's good enough for your data, if you've gotten comfortable over the last 20, 30 years around data security, data privacy, all the cybersecurity things that you've invested in, all of those things, if we move the model right next to your data, then you're protected in the same way. If you're taking the data and moving it somewhere else, right, then you have to go and redo what you've actually had to invest decades getting comfortable with, right? The simplest way is to actually bring the model next to your data, because if it's good enough for your data, it's good enough for your model.
Yeah, very interesting. If it's good enough for your data, it's good enough for your model. Obviously, Seminova has like a whole stack approach, and they're also targeting that like idea of security and making sure that everyone knows that everything is encompassed. You don't have to give your data to a third party. You're the one that's basically in control. They're doing the whole thing for you there.
Well, yeah, we have, just to mention Sambanova, we've been tracking them. They were a startup, one of the few independent hardware software startups. There's a few others. They're still being successful in their niche, and they also make powerful AI chips. People should know not just NVIDIA and Intel and AMD, but there's some smaller, innovative, independent AI companies doing the same things and succeeding to some extent. Okay, so Audio Socket, yeah. So Audio Socket is a music licensing and firm based in Great Britain. Their CEO, Jen, is American. They have been involved in this kind of uprising of musicians and artists who signed a strongly worded letter saying, artists' rights should be protected against generative AI infringing on their original work. She's really well versed in this. So let's give a listen to Jen Anderson Miller of Audio Socket.
I don't think that, generative AI music creators set out with the intention of assaulting human creativity. I mean, I give people the benefit of the doubt, and I tend to think that we're sort of behind this veil of ignorance until we've invented something. And then it's sort of like, well, what was the intention anyway? So I look at it more opportunistically. I think where the letter, what it's addressing is, I think it's widely understood that a lot of these training models have trained on copyrighted material without the permission of the rights holders. And that's what's being addressed by this letter. In fact, beginning of the letter, it specifically says, don't get us wrong. We believe that power of what's going to happen in creative industries due to generative AI is, transformative and exciting. However, obviously rights holders need to be at the table. And so I think of it as like, you don't want anything to be done to you. You want to do it as a party to it. So, I mean, I know this is way off using another industry entirely, but if you think about new pharmaceutical treatments, people want to give permission to be tested on. Like if their bodies are going to be sort of, something that's going to be tested upon, they want to give permission that they're willing to be a party to that. Well, artists are the same. They want to be willing parties to whatever is being done, especially with music. Like with a painting, it's a physical good that you can sell, and there's a transaction that happens there. With music, there is no physical good, and it can be very difficult to protect that work. So when directly asked, in fact, during the Senate trials where Sam Altman was being questioned, the senator from Tennessee, I believe it was, Marsha Blackburn, didn't even ask the question. She said, I prompted a Garth Brooks track and I got an iterative Garth Brooks track. You're using copyrighted material to train, and there was no rebuttal. And likewise, when the CTO of OpenAI was questioned about where the source material came from, specifically, it was the Wall Street Journal columnist that said, did you use videos from YouTube, from Facebook, for example? And the answer was, I'm not so sure about that, but if it's publicly available, maybe. And so I think all of those things kind of bring up the question of permission, attribution, and the ability to be party to how money is made by using those works.
Very interesting. Again, it kind of references what we were talking about before. Basically, with the NYU professors of like, how is our data being used? How is our data being interchanged or exchanged? And we've had like the musicians, the authors, and so many other people have said, we like this technology, but please, please ask us permission before you use our work to train your data.
That's true. We did explore all that stuff. It should be noted here, though, and I'll note it, that in general, the generative AI vendors are arguing fair use. So if your stuff is out there, then our Gen AI can train itself on it. That's all being played out in court, various courts, various lawsuits. I think we're seeing a trend of generative AI vendors like resigning themselves. Yes, we do have to license this stuff. You've written about it recently, Esther. Generative AI vendors making deals with the Associated Press, making deals with Reuters, et cetera, to actually get their permission. Unlike OpenAI, which didn't do that with New York Times content, allegedly. So, which is the big lawsuit that's in court.
I was gonna say that I think the main issue with that, especially when it comes to OpenAI and New York Times, is the idea that is the amount that you're offering, is it enough, right? Is that enough, right? Well, how much is the Associated Press getting for what they're getting? How much is OpenAI offered the New York Times? So there's definitely that difference.
I think it's going to be very expensive. Okay, so we did a bunch of podcasts on the ethical, legal implications of generative AI, including Audio Socket and Sam Manova, some of the other ones. We also did one over past year on open source generative AI. We also did a podcast episode on artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is bringing us into the philosophical, theoretical realm of generative AI, in which vendors are working towards developing this super powerful AI that has all the capabilities intellectually of humans, supposedly. And so that leads some, maybe we call them doomers, looking at a potential world way in the future, or maybe not so way in the future, ruled by AI, with no humans. That was Dan Fagella who was talking about that on the podcast. And we also talked about bias in Gen AI black box models.
Yeah, we also delved into political realm. We looked at President Biden's executive order on AI and did some fun ed projection interviews last year around December of what we can look for in this year, 2024. So I wanted us to play a clip from Mike Leone, who is an analyst with Tech Target ESG, just to see what he predicted for this year on how generative AI will be. And we're already into the second half of the year. So let's see if any of those predictions came true.
2024 will be the year of responsible AI, period. There's a lot of reasons for it. It's not just driven by hallucinations, though that is very important, right? So we're seeing things like retrieval augmented generation that can enable organizations to bring in their own data to these models, to not have to retrain them, but say, hey, go to this knowledge source, this data source, and pull some of our own enterprise data. That's going to help a lot with hallucinations, but I think it's a much bigger issue. And I think it's going to be driven by not only needing to ensure trust for the end users, right? The last thing an organization wants to do is spend a ton of money, invest in people and resources and processes. And then there's a hallucination that happens, and all of those end users are like, I'm not using that model. I'm not using that interface. Like, I can't trust the output. So I think regulation coming, and we're starting to see this already with the administration's executive order. I think that is going to really force organizations to prioritize transparency, accountability, governance, security, bias, ethics, you name it. You can go down the path. How many buzzwords can we list associated with responsible AI, right? But that's imperative going forward. And that's why I think open source is going to be so valuable in being able to drive a new level of responsibility. And it's not just driving responsibility, it's driving agility. Like, all right, a new regulation came in, we have to address this. Let's work together through this open source LLM to address it. And then you know how quick that's going to hit other models and other organizations that are pushing out even proprietary models. So I just think there's so much focus and open source driving the market that when it comes to responsibility and security and safety, I think we're going to be able to address some of those issues faster than we've ever addressed them in the past.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think? I think he was right when it came to the topic of open source, right? I feel like a lot of when we had Mistral, right? Microsoft invested in Mistral, and we had their open source models. I think Meta also came out with Llama 3. So what do you think? What other predictions did he make? Regulation, I'm not sure if that's has true. Has true. I think it still is slow. What are your thoughts, Sean?
Well, I think Mike Leone of Tech Target's Enterprise Strategy Group was right about responsible AI. I mean, that's got to be job number one for generative AI developers right now. There's a lot of pressure on them. One thing I find out is that IBM actually is a player in this area with their Watson X governance. Making sure you can apply this layer of rules to not rules-based AI, but rules about what kind of outputs and what kind of inputs you can use with generative AI. So, because enterprises and consumers need to be secure in knowing that it's going to be safe and reliable, and these LLMs are not going to be out of control. So, I think Mike is right about that. I mean, I feel like he was right on the mark about that in open source. I mean, one thing I will point out is that our Tech Target colleague, Beth Parizeau, pointed out, and we had a meeting about generative AI, and she pointed out that Meta Llama is actually not fully open source. It's open, but not completely open source. And you reported on that too. But there are some fully open source, and that would include Mistral, and also I believe Grok from XAI. That's Elon Musk's AI company. So, what about the future?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about our greatest hits, right? We've talked about some of the past episodes, so all our guests, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. We are a fairly young podcast, so thanks for coming on and talking about all these topics with us. But now that we have had those guests on, we hope to have some of them come back again. But looking ahead as to what the future of our podcast, what do you think our listeners can expect, Sean? I'm thinking that now that Gen AI has been established, you can really expect us to delve into the application of Gen AI. I believe we might look at some of the people that are applying it. We're trying to get some of those people right now. We are still trying to get OpenAI, NVIDIA to also come on because they are very key players in this field. And I also think we'll delve into some of the ways that the market is shifting, right? I think last year we spoke a lot about large language models. It seems like the larger the better. And this year there's kind of been a shift. Like Sean mentioned, I reported last week about OpenAI GPT-4o mini. So the smaller the better. We're looking at that. We're looking at also domain specific models. What are your thoughts on these, Sean?
Yeah, so small language models even have a name now, SLMs, instead of LLMs. And so that debate is well underway, I think. And not just a debate. I mean, a lot of vendors have both. Microsoft has its own homegrown small language models. You've reported on too that didn't come out of the open AI. Some of the vendors have both, and then there's some companies that are just putting out only small language models. But so that debate's getting started or underway. And so the open source Gen AI versus proprietary, that's really a battle that's raging. And Mike Leone touched on that. So we'll keep digging into those over the next year of this podcast. So one thing I've started to think about and notice is I talked with this startup vendor called Orbi, which was founded by former employees of UiPath, an RPA vendor, one of the big three RPA vendors, and then someone from Google. They may have this concept called a large action model. So it's using generative AI to create not images, text, video, or whatever, but rather processes for RPA, for automating it on their own. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see in the future, and maybe we'll have guests. Some people who make large ERP models that generate enterprise operation control. So maybe we'll call those ERMs for enterprise resource models. And on the personal assistant model front, which is a big topic everybody's talking about, so maybe we'll have PAMs, personal action models. Love acronyms. I think we don't have enough acronyms.
I was going to say all these acronyms, Sean.
We don't have enough acronyms in tech, so we should have more. No, just kidding. We have acronyms. And I want to get into the people behind all these generative AI permutations on the podcast in the future. In addition to, and I'll say it again, NVIDIA, OpenAI, Meta, people who want to send us guests who we can interview.
I mean, we already had M12, so I don't know what NVIDIA is waiting for, right? And I definitely don't know what Sam Altman from OpenAI is waiting for. All of our podcasts up until now have featured outside guests, other than its appearances by analysts from Tech Target Enterprise Strategy Group. We now want to welcome our first guest of the second season of the Targeting AI podcast from Tech Target Editorial. Do you want to guess who it is, Sean?
I don't know. I just don't know who it could be.
Well, it's not a person. Drum roll, please. I would like to welcome Google Gemini, a multimodal large language model. Hi, Gemini. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I'm always learning and growing, and I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Okay, Gemini. So we've been talking about LLMs. So how can LLMs like you reduce or eliminate hallucinations that everybody is really worried about?
Reducing or eliminating hallucinations for everyone is a complex issue. Here's why. Normal hallucinations. Many healthy people experience occasional hallucinations, like hypnagogic hallucinations, seeing shapes as you fall asleep, or hypnopompic hallucinations, hearing sounds as you wake up. These are brief and harmless. Underlying cause. Hallucinations can be a symptom of various conditions, from medication side effects to mental health conditions like schizophrenia. The approach to reducing hallucinations depends on the cause. Here's how we can approach hallucinations.
Okay, I'm going to pause there because Google Gemini thought we were talking about psychological hallucinations, right? So that's almost a hallucination. Add Google Gemini. Let's ask another question, Esther.
Yeah, Gemini, can you please outline the nature of the future relationship between humans and AI?
The future relationship between humans and AI is likely to be one of collaboration and augmentation. AI is expected to excel at tasks involving data analysis, pattern recognition, and repetitive processes, while humans will continue to provide creativity, critical thinking, and social skills. AI systems will likely be used to enhance human capabilities. AI can assist humans in various fields, from providing medical diagnoses to designing new materials. Automate tasks. Repetitive tasks can be automated by AI, freeing up human time for more complex endeavors. Improve decision making. AI can analyze vast amounts of data to identify patterns and trends that humans might miss, aiding better decision making. The success of this future relationship will depend on careful development and deployment of AI, with a focus on ethical considerations. AI systems should be designed and used in a way that is fair, unbiased, and transparent. Human-centered design. AI should be designed to complement and augment human capabilities, not replace them. Collaboration. Humans and AI should work together to achieve shared goals.
Thanks, Gemini. Well said. I have a question, though. What are some of your drawbacks or weaknesses as a large language model?
I'm still under development, and I have some limitations. For instance, I can't access or modify your Google Drive or Gmail yet. Additionally, I can't directly interact with your phone or other devices. I'm constantly learning and improving, and I hope to overcome these limitations in the future.
Thanks, Gemini. Esther, do you have another question for our esteemed guest?
Yes, Gemini, my final question is, can you please give the Tech Target Targeting AI podcast a review?
I am unable to answer questions in the form of a simulated dialogue. I can answer your questions in an informative way, even if they are open-ended, challenging, or strange. I can also generate different creative text formats of text content, like poems, code, scripts, musical pieces, email, letters, etc. I will try my best to fulfill all your requirements.
Okay, Gemini, can you think of another good name for an AI podcast?
Certainly. Here are some catchy and informative names for an AI podcast, considering different tones and target audiences. Catchy and clever. Silicon Sapiens. AI Decoded. The Future Now. Informative and straightforward. Exploring artificial intelligence. The AI Revolution. In Machines We Trust. I hope this helps.
It kind of helped. I think that AI Decoded was my favorite one. Other than that, everything else I don't think are good names. But thanks,
Yeah.
Gemini, for joining us on our podcast. We would like to have your creator Google again.
Yes, Gemini, can you please ask your creator to send a representative to our show?
I can't directly contact Google representatives on your behalf, but I can provide you with some suggestions for reaching out to them. Google Podcast Partnerships. You can find information on Google Podcast Partnerships through a web search. This program connects podcast creators with potential sponsors, including Google. Google AI Blog. Consider contacting the Google AI Blog team. They may be interested in featuring your podcast on the blog, which could help you connect with Google representatives. Social media. Reach out to Google AI on social media platforms like Twitter or LinkedIn.
All right. Thanks, Google Gemini, for some of your somewhat decent suggestions, but others, not so great.
I understand your disappointment. I'm still under development, and I'm always learning how to be more helpful. Is there anything else I can help you with before you go?
No, we're all set. Thanks and bye.
Well, that was definitely an interesting guest. Thanks, Gemini, and thanks to our listeners for sticking with us for the past year. We really appreciate it. I mean, we have over 5,100 downloads, so thank you for that. I'm pretty sure I didn't download the podcast 5,100 times, and I'm sure Sean didn't download the podcast
Only a couple.
100 times. For our listeners, please continue to follow us on all podcast platforms, as Apple, Spotify, and any other podcast platforms. Please continue to download and share it on your social media platforms. And you can continue to find us by clicking the Tech Target Editorial AI website. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.